Deadly Tarantula Girl coming to you from my private serpentarium tonight to bring you an interview video. This is actually in response to a viewer email asking me a lot of questions about breeding, and they were really good questions, so I actually decided to do a whole video on it, trying to answer all of his questions in one, since number one, that's a lot to type, and number two, I thought it would be good information for everybody to have. Mr. Tarantula James is actually a fellow YouTuber, and he asks a lot, so I'm gonna go ahead and just read his entire email. He wrote, "Hi Marita, this is James from the Six Constrictors." That's what he comments under. And I now have my own YouTube channel specifically for tarantulas. If you want to check me out on my new channel, it's Mr. Tarantula James at YouTube, so check him out. I know the name is probably not the best, but I like to keep it simple. I like it. Another thing I wanted to ask you is, when you have the time, do you think you could make a video on what species of tarantulas are the best to breed? For example, one reputable tarantula dealer asked me what my intentions are with the tarantulas, to keep them as pets or for breeding purposes, which is why I want to work with them. So I was going to buy an Antilles pink-toe tarantula, which is the Carabina versicolor, but they let me know that Carabina versicolor do not sexually mature for close to 10 years. So they told me the better choice would be Carabina laeta, because they are sexually mature faster in around 1 to 2 years. I want to know which tarantula species have the biggest amount of slings, which ones sexually mature faster, how to make a homemade incubator for egg sacs, when I would have to put them in an incubator, or maybe sometimes I won't need to incubate them. I want to know everything there is to know about breeding so I can do things the right way. I know that's a lot of breeding questions. I hope your day is going well. MTJ. So thank you so much, first of all, for watching and for starting your own channel. I think that's super cool. And I want to break this down and address each question specifically. So first of all, check him out, and I do like your name. You know, I will be perfectly honest with you. I'm not sure why that dealer told you that information about Carabina versicolor, formerly known as Avicularia versicolor. That really makes me wonder how cold they're keeping their animals, that may be stunting their growth, and how often they're feeding, because if their animals are barely fed, they may be developmentally delayed. I don't know. I've never, ever seen a versicolor take that long to grow up. In my experience, and I've reproduced this species plenty, my slings from the egg sac grow up in 2 to 3 years. Mature males within 2, mature females within 3. They're not giant at that point, but I've actually had tiny little 3-year-old females laying ghost sacs because they had not been bred, and they were mature and they were ready to reproduce. So let's just take a look at one and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Another question he asks is, what species sexually mature faster? Instead of informing you about specific species, I wanted to keep it a little more general, because a lot of the genus share a lot of factors, and that way it is not going to narrow you down to feeling like you have to collect or breed one specific species, but you can still make an informed decision. Now this is one of the slower growing species, Brachypelma smithii, and the genus Brachypelma in general tends to have this trait. This animal can take 5 to 10 years to sexually mature. And one thing that I have taken note of in this species is that you can power feed this animal and you can grow it up to the size that would typically be sexually mature. However, I personally believe that Brachypelma smithii have to actually be a certain age before they will mature, because I've grown a 3/4 sling up to around 5 inches in 2 years, and yet those females fail to ever reproduce. Now back in the 90s, I used to power feed my animals because I just thought it was good for them and I thought I would be able to reproduce from them quickly, but I have learned otherwise. I really don't do that anymore because I just don't see the point in it. And so I just know that Brachypelma are going to grow like molasses, and it's going to be practically eternity before you can breed them. Luckily, they are a beautiful genus, and I think they're really fun to grow up. This is an example of one of my 2-year-old males that I reproduced in 2015, and it is now autumn of 2017. He is mature. This species does not have tibial spurs, yet you can see that he does have his pedipalpal bulbs. This is a specimen of a mature Avicularia carabina versicolor. I didn't do anything special. I keep them between about 78 and 82 degrees. I do not power feed. I feed weekly, essentially as much as they will comfortably eat within a day or two. I don't like for there to be insects left in their enclosures, because sometimes the insects can then harass or even feed on your predator, which is not what you want. I can tell you without a doubt that, first of all, I think versicolor are easy to breed, and that they absolutely, I don't think under any circumstance, should take 10 years to mature. That information was far from factual. I don't imagine that they were intentionally misleading buyers. I don't know why that was said, but I can promise you now that that's absolutely not true. That brings me to the next question, in which he asks which animals reproduce the most slings, and this is a Lasiodora parahybana. They can reproduce over 1,000 slings from one egg sac, and the genus Lasiodora in general tend to have high numbers of babies. He also asks which are the easiest to breed, and one way, I already mentioned tropical species, but a cheat way to find out is to be looking at price lists, and the animals that are selling for less are often priced that way because of how easy they are to reproduce. This animal, for example, they're relatively easy to breed and reproduce, and then when they have an egg sac, they have tons and tons of slings. So this spiderling is a relatively affordable animal. If you're looking at price lists and you're seeing animals going for $5 or $10, then you know that that's probably an animal that's easier to reproduce. He also asks how to make a homemade incubator for egg sacs and how to decide when to incubate eggs and when to leave them with the mother. Now, I actually have some links that can show you how to build an incubation chamber videos that I previously have done, where I show you step by step, as well as a video on how to make an incubator. But to be perfectly honest with you, something that I've used for years and years are just the run-of-the-mill Hovabator. They're designed for chicken eggs, but they work very well for reptile and tarantula egg sacs because you can adjust the temperature to whatever you want. It's just a cheap little styrofoam incubator, and even in the incubators that I have custom built, I have often used the heat elements out of a Hovabator, which obviously that's one of the most important parts. Now for a faster growing animal. This is a beautiful Poecilotheria metallica, and the genus Poecilotheria in general is quite fast growing. Number one, they molt more frequently, and number two, every time they do molt out, the animal that emerges from the molt is often nearly twice the size of the animal before it molted, which is really, really incredible. I think it's absolutely fascinating to watch. He also asks which breeds are the easiest to breed, and I think in general, tropical species are easier to reproduce because I feel like it's pretty simple to simulate their seasons and to stimulate breeding, and that actually North American species, even though they seem kind of run-of-the-mill, are more difficult to breed. And at least in my experience, it's very difficult to get a North American species to reproduce in captivity, to where tropical species often, you know, you flood them out and you keep them warm they tend to breed fairly easily, practically at the drop of a hat. They tend to breed and drop egg sacs fairly easily. He had one more question, and that was about whether or not to pull the egg sac and incubate it or let the mother do it. And that is one that I'm going to answer in my next breeding video. But thank you so much for your questions, Mr. Tarantula James. Everybody check out his channel. I hope this enlightened you, and I'll see you again very soon.